I never thought I would become the kind of woman who checks her husband's phone in the middle of the night. I never imagined I would be the wife who memorizes bank statements, screenshots text messages, and builds a case against the man she once promised to love until death parted us. But here I am, sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Boston, about to tell you the story of how my husband became my enemy and how I made him pay for every single lie he ever told me. My name is Sarah, and 3 years ago, I believed I had the perfect life. I want you to understand that I am not naive. I grew up hard. I lost both my parents before I turned 18. My father died when I was 12, a construction accident that left my mother shattered, and me suddenly responsible for holding together what remained of our family. My mother followed him 6 years later, her heart giving out like it had simply decided it was tired of beating without him. I learned early that life was not fair, that people leave whether they want to or not, and that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. So when I met Daniel Mitchell at a charity gala in Manhattan, I did not fall for him immediately. I was suspicious of his charm, his easy smile, the way he seemed to know exactly what to say to make everyone in the room feel like the most important person alive. I was 28 years old, working as a senior accountant at one of the largest firms in New York, and I had built my life brick by brick from the rubble my parents left behind. I did not need a man. I did not need anyone. But Daniel was persistent. He called me the day after we met, then the day after that, then every single day for 3 weeks until I finally agreed to have dinner with him. He took me to a restaurant I could never have afforded, ordered wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and spent the entire evening asking me questions about my life as if the answers genuinely mattered to him. He wanted to know about my parents, about my childhood, about my dreams and fears, and the things that kept me awake at night. No one had ever asked me those questions before. No one had ever seemed to care. By our 5th date, I was falling. By our 10th, I was gone. Daniel Mitchell swept into my life like a hurricane, beautiful and destructive, and I was too blinded by love to see the wreckage he would eventually leave behind. We married 14 months after we met, a lavish ceremony at his family's estate in Connecticut that felt more like a society event than a wedding. His mother, Victoria, watched me walk down the aisle with an expression I could not quite read at the time. I thought perhaps she was simply emotional, caught up in the moment of watching her only son commit his life to another woman. I know now that what I saw in her eyes was not emotion, it was assessment. She was measuring me, calculating my worth, and finding me lacking in every possible way. But I did not care about Victoria's approval. I had Daniel. I had this beautiful, successful, devoted man who chose me out of all the women in the world, who promised to love me and protect me and build a life with me that would make up for all the years I spent alone. I believed him. God help me. I believed every single word. The first 2 years of our marriage were everything I had dreamed they would be. We bought a brownstone in the Back Bay neighborhood of Boston, close enough to Daniel's real estate development company that he could walk to work, close enough to my new position at a local accounting firm that my commute was manageable. We traveled on weekends to Martha's Vineyard, to Cape Cod, to the little bed and breakfasts dotting the New England coastline that Daniel seemed to know by heart. We talked about having children, about the names we would choose, about the kind of parents we would be. I told him I wanted to give my children the stability I never had, and he held my face in his hands and promised me he would never let anything hurt our family. I should have noticed the cracks sooner. I should have paid attention to the small inconsistencies, the minor lies, the moments when his story did not quite add up. But I was in love, and love makes fools of us all. When he came home late from work, smelling faintly of perfume that was not mine, I believed him when he said he had been meeting with clients. When he began taking calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones that stopped the moment I entered, I believed him when he said the conversations were confidential business matters. When the credit card statements showed charges at restaurants I had never been to, hotels I had never stayed in, jewelry stores that had never produced a gift for me, I believed him when he said they were client expenses, networking costs, the price of building his empire. I believed because I wanted to believe. I believed because the alternative was too painful to consider. I believed because admitting the truth would mean admitting that I had been wrong about everything, that the life I thought I had built was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me compliant and blind. The moment everything changed was so ordinary that it almost feels absurd to describe it. It was a Tuesday evening in October, the kind of crisp autumn night that makes Boston feel like the most beautiful city in the world. The leaves were turning gold and crimson outside our windows, and I was preparing dinner while waiting for Daniel to come home from what he had described as a late meeting with investors. I had music playing, something soft and instrumental that filled the kitchen with warmth, and I was thinking about how lucky I was, how far I had come from the frightened 18-year-old girl who buried her mother with nothing but a handful of change and a heart full of grief. Daniel's laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter where he had left it that morning, and when it chimed with an incoming email notification, I glanced at it without thinking. I was not snooping. I was not suspicious. I simply looked at the screen the way you might glance at a clock to check the time, an automatic response to a familiar sound. The email preview showed only a few words, but those words changed everything. Last night was incredible. I cannot wait to see you again. All my love, Rebecca. I remember standing there with a wooden spoon in my hand, tomato sauce dripping onto the counter, my brain refusing to process what my eyes had just seen. I remember the way my heart seemed to stop and then restart in a painful, lurching rhythm that made me feel like I might collapse. I remember the way the music kept playing, cheerful and oblivious, while my entire world crumbled around me. I should have confronted him the moment he walked through the door. I should have thrown that laptop at his head and demanded an explanation. I should have screamed and cried and made him tell me the truth. But I did not do any of those things. Instead, I finished making dinner. I set the table with our nice plates. I poured 2 glasses of wine and waited for my husband to come home so I could watch his face while he lied to me. Daniel arrived at 8:30, kissing my cheek with lips that had probably touched another woman's skin hours before. He told me the meeting ran late, that the investors were difficult, that he was exhausted and grateful to be home with me. He sat across from me at our dining table, eating the meal I had prepared, drinking the wine I had poured, and I watched him with new eyes. I studied the way he avoided my gaze when he spoke about his day. I noticed the slight hesitation before each lie, the micro-expressions that flickered across his face too quickly for casual observation, but perfectly visible to someone who was finally paying attention. That night, after he fell asleep, I took his laptop into our guest bathroom and spent 3 hours reading through his emails. What I found destroyed the last remaining pieces of my trust. Rebecca Torres was not just some random woman. She was his business partner's assistant, a 29-year-old with dark hair and ambitious eyes who had been sleeping with my husband for over 8 months. Their correspondence was extensive, intimate, and devastating. They had inside jokes I did not understand. They had plans I was not part of. They had a relationship that existed in the shadows of my marriage, thriving on deception while I remained oblivious and faithful. But that was not the worst of it. As I scrolled through his messages, I discovered that Rebecca was only the latest in a long line of betrayals. There had been others before her, women whose names I did not recognize, whose faces I had never seen, who had shared my husband's bed while I slept alone, believing he was working late to build our future. The affairs stretched back to before our wedding, before our engagement, before he ever told me he loved me. Daniel Mitchell had been cheating on me from the very beginning. I stayed in that bathroom until the sun came up, reading through years of lies, piecing together the truth that had been hidden from me since the day we met. By the time I emerged, my eyes were swollen from crying, my hands were shaking, and something fundamental had shifted inside me. The woman who walked out of that bathroom was not the same woman who had walked in. The trusting wife, the devoted partner, the grateful orphan who thought she had finally found her family was gone. In her place was someone new, someone harder, someone who understood that the man sleeping in the next room was not her husband. He was her enemy. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still the same loving wife who believed every word he said. I had to kiss him goodbye in the morning, knowing he was going to spend the day with another woman. I had to lie beside him at night while my skin crawled with the knowledge of his betrayal. I had to smile and laugh and play my role in the elaborate fiction of our marriage, while secretly, methodically, building the case that would eventually destroy him. I am an accountant by training and by nature. I understand numbers. I understand patterns. I understand how to trace money through the labyrinthine systems designed to hide it. And so, while Daniel believed I was blissfully ignorant, I began investigating every aspect of his financial life. I created copies of bank statements, investment records, tax returns. I documented every suspicious transaction, every unexplained expense, every discrepancy between what he told me and what the numbers revealed. I built spreadsheets that would eventually become evidence. I built a case that would eventually become his ruin. But I needed help. I could not do this alone, and I could not trust just anyone with the secrets I was uncovering. So I called the one person who had been with me through everything, the one person who had never let me down. Claire Ashford and I met when we were 7 years old, two awkward girls in a Boston elementary school who bonded over our shared love of books and our mutual distrust of the popular kids. She had been my best friend through my father's death, my mother's decline, my years of struggle and survival. She was the maid of honor at my wedding, the first person I called with good news, the shoulder I cried on when life became too heavy to bear alone. Claire knew me better than anyone in the world, and when I told her what I had discovered about Daniel, her reaction was exactly what I needed. She did not try to comfort me with empty platitudes. She did not suggest that maybe I had misunderstood, that perhaps there was an innocent explanation. She looked me in the eyes and said, "What do you want to do about it?" I told her I wanted justice. I told her I wanted to expose him for what he really was. I told her I wanted to take everything he had taken from me and more. Claire nodded slowly, her sharp legal mind already working through the possibilities. She was a corporate attorney at a prestigious Boston firm, and she understood exactly what kind of battle I was about to wage. "You need documentation," she said. "You need proof that will hold up in court, and you need to be very, very careful. Daniel is smart, and his family has resources. If he finds out what you are doing before you are ready, he will use every weapon at his disposal to destroy you." I knew she was right. Victoria Mitchell had connections throughout Boston society, in law firms and banks and country clubs that had been serving her family for generations. Daniel had inherited her ruthlessness along with her money. If I was going to beat him, I needed to be smarter, more patient, and more strategic than he could ever imagine. Claire recommended a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former Boston police detective who had left the force after 20 years to open his own agency. She had used him before on corporate cases, and she trusted him completely. I met with Marcus in a neutral location, a busy coffee shop in Cambridge where we could talk without being overheard. He was older than I expected, with gray hair and tired eyes that had clearly seen too much of the worst humanity had to offer. But there was something steady about him, something reassuring in the way he listened to my story without judgment or surprise. "Your husband is not the first man I have investigated for infidelity," he said when I finished, "and unfortunately, he will not be the last. But I can tell you this much. In my experience, when there is this much smoke, there is always more fire than you expect. If he has been cheating for years and hiding it this successfully, there are probably other secrets as well. Financial secrets, business secrets, things that will make the affairs look minor by comparison." I told Marcus I wanted to know everything. Every lie, every secret, every hidden corner of Daniel's life that he had kept concealed from me. I gave him access to the documentation I had already gathered, and I authorized him to dig as deep as necessary to uncover the truth. He warned me that what he found might be painful, that sometimes the truth was worse than the imagination could conjure. I told him I did not care. I told him I needed to know exactly who I had married so I could figure out how to destroy him. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception. I continued playing the role of devoted wife while secretly feeding information to Marcus and consulting with Claire about my legal options. I became an actress in my own life, performing a character I no longer recognized. A woman who smiled at her husband across the dinner table while plotting his downfall. Some nights, the pretense was so exhausting that I would lock myself in the bathroom and weep silently, my hand pressed against my mouth to muffle the sounds of my grief. Other nights, I felt nothing at all, as if the constant lies had numbed me to any real emotion. Daniel noticed nothing. He was too absorbed in his own deceptions to recognize mine. He continued conducting his affair with Rebecca, continued lying about his whereabouts and his activities, continued treating me with the casual affection of a man who believed his wife was too stupid to suspect anything. His arrogance was breathtaking. His confidence in his own cleverness would eventually become his undoing. The first major revelation came 3 weeks after I hired Marcus. He called me from an unknown number, using the secure phone he had given me for exactly this purpose, and asked me to meet him at our usual location. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table, a manila folder resting beneath his hands like something precious and dangerous. "I found something," he said as I sat down. "Something bigger than the affairs." He opened the folder and began explaining what his investigation had uncovered. Daniel's real estate development company, the business he had described to me as successful and legitimate, was drowning in debt. He had taken out loans against properties he did not fully own, had borrowed money from investors using fraudulent projections, had created a web of financial deceit that made my husband not just an adulterer, but a criminal. The numbers Marcus showed me were staggering. Millions of dollars in hidden liabilities, falsified records submitted to banks and investors, a Ponzi-like structure designed to use new investment money to pay off old debts while siphoning off profits for personal use. I stared at the documents in front of me, my accountant's brain struggling to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. Daniel had not just betrayed me personally. He had betrayed dozens of investors, committed what appeared to be multiple counts of fraud, and put countless people's money at risk for his own greed. "There is more," Marcus said, and his voice carried a weight that made my stomach drop. "The money he has been stealing, a significant portion of it has been going to his mother. Victoria Mitchell has been benefiting from her son's crimes for years. She is not just aware of what he is doing, she is actively involved." This revelation should not have surprised me, but somehow it did. Victoria had always been cold to me, dismissive of my background and my lack of social connections, but I had never imagined she was capable of participating in outright fraud. I had underestimated her just as thoroughly as Daniel had underestimated me. "What do I do with this?" I asked Marcus. "How do I use this information?" He leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that commanded attention. "You have options. You could go to the authorities, the SEC, the FBI, the State Attorney General's office. What Daniel has done is serious enough to warrant criminal prosecution. But if you do that, you lose control of the process. The investigation could take years. There are no guarantees about what will happen or how it will affect you." "And the other option?" Marcus smiled, a grim expression that held no humor. "You use what you know strategically. You protect yourself first. You position yourself to come out of this with as much as possible, while making sure he faces consequences for what he has done. It is a longer game, but it gives you more control over the outcome." I thought about what he was saying, weighing the options against my desire for justice and my need for security. I had spent my life fighting for stability, clawing my way out of poverty and loss to build something that felt permanent. I was not about to let Daniel's crimes drag me down with him. I was going to protect myself, and then I was going to make him pay. Claire helped me develop a strategy. We would begin divorce proceedings, but not immediately. First, I needed to secure my own financial position. I started moving money into accounts Daniel did not know about, small amounts that would not attract his attention, but would accumulate into a safety net I could rely on when everything fell apart. I documented every asset I was legally entitled to, and I began quietly consulting with divorce attorneys who specialized in high-conflict cases involving hidden assets and fraud. During this time, I continued gathering evidence. Marcus kept investigating, and every week brought new revelations that made me question how I could have been so blind. Daniel had a secret apartment in the city where he met Rebecca and other women. He had hidden bank accounts in the Cayman Islands where he stashed the money he skimmed from his investors. He had forged my signature on documents that made me technically liable for some of his company's debts, a discovery that filled me with cold fury and hardened my resolve. The more I learned, the more I understood that Daniel had never truly loved me. I was a prop in his performance, a respectable wife who legitimized his image and provided cover for his crimes. He had chosen me because I was vulnerable, because I had no family who might ask questions, because I was so desperate for love and stability that I would overlook the warning signs that any more cynical woman would have seen immediately. He had exploited my loneliness and my trust, and he had done it deliberately, knowingly, without a shred of genuine affection. That realization was perhaps the most painful of all. I could accept that he had cheated on me. I could accept that he had lied about his business. But the understanding that our entire relationship had been a calculated manipulation, that every tender moment and whispered promise had been a tool to control me, that shattered something deep inside me that I am not sure will ever fully heal. But from that shattered place, something else emerged. Rage. Cold, focused, implacable rage that burned away my grief and replaced it with determination. I was going to destroy Daniel Mitchell. I was going to expose every lie, every crime, every secret he had worked so hard to hide. And I was going to do it in a way that would leave him with nothing, the same nothing he had intended to leave me. 4 months after I first discovered his betrayal, I was ready to make my move. I had enough evidence to bury him 10 times over. I had secured my finances, consulted with the best divorce attorney in Boston, and prepared myself emotionally for the battle ahead. All that remained was to choose the perfect moment to strike. That moment came at his company's annual investor dinner, a lavish event held at a historic hotel in downtown Boston. Daniel had insisted I attend, needing me to play my role as devoted wife one last time. I agreed, understanding that this would be the last performance of my marriage, the final act of a play that had run far too long. I remember getting dressed that evening, studying my reflection in the mirror as I applied makeup and arranged my hair. I looked calm, composed, the picture of a supportive spouse preparing to celebrate her husband's success. But behind my eyes, something fierce was burning, a fire that had been building for months and was finally about to be unleashed. The dinner was exactly as I expected, a parade of wealthy investors and influential business people all gathered to congratulate Daniel on his supposed successes. He worked the room with practiced charm, shaking hands and making promises and selling a vision of prosperity that I knew to be completely fabricated. I watched him from across the room, marveling at how convincing he was, how effortlessly he lied to people who trusted him with their money and their futures. Rebecca was there as well, standing in a corner with other staff members, her eyes finding Daniel's whenever she thought no one was looking. I caught her gaze once and held it, and something in my expression must have unsettled her because she quickly looked away. She would soon learn that her position as Daniel's mistress had put her in the crosshairs of something far more dangerous than a jealous wife. The dinner proceeded according to plan. There were speeches and toasts and promises of future success. Daniel spoke eloquently about his company's growth, about the opportunities ahead, about the partnerships and developments that would make everyone in the room even wealthier than they already were. I listened to every word, knowing that nearly everything he said was a lie, and I waited. I had arranged for Marcus to be stationed outside the hotel with copies of all the evidence we had gathered. At precisely 9:30, while the guests were mingling after the formal program, a team of federal agents entered the building and approached Daniel. I had made the decision to involve the authorities after all, but on my terms and according to my timeline. I had provided them with everything they needed to secure arrest warrants, and I had done it in a way that ensured maximum public humiliation for my husband. I will never forget the look on his face when he realized what was happening. The agents approached him calmly but firmly, and I watched as confusion gave way to panic, as panic gave way to understanding, as understanding gave way to something I had never seen in Daniel before: fear. Raw, primal fear that twisted his handsome features into something almost unrecognizable. The agents handcuffed him in front of 200 of the most prominent people in Boston. They read him his rights while investors gasped and whispered, while cameras that had been positioned to document the evening's celebration captured instead the arrest of one of the city's most respected businessmen. I watched it all unfold with a satisfaction that bordered on the spiritual, a deep, resonant justice that hummed through my bones and made every moment of suffering worthwhile. Victoria was there as well, and I made sure she saw me watching. Her face was frozen in an expression of horror and rage, her carefully maintained composure crumbling as she realized that her son's arrest was only the beginning. She did not know yet that I had provided evidence of her involvement as well, that agents would be arriving at her Connecticut estate within the hour to execute their own search warrants. She did not know that her entire world was about to collapse around her, just as mine had collapsed around me on that October evening when I saw those words on Daniel's laptop. All my love, Rebecca. Rebecca herself was removed from the room shortly after Daniel, though she was not arrested at that time. She would be questioned extensively in the days ahead and would eventually become a cooperating witness against my husband in exchange for reduced charges. Her testimony would add crucial details to the prosecution's case, details about Daniel's activities that even my investigation had not uncovered. I took no pleasure in her downfall, but I felt no sympathy either. She had known he was married. She had chosen to participate in his deceptions. She would face her own consequences. The aftermath of Daniel's arrest was chaotic and overwhelming. The media descended on the story with ravenous intensity, drawn by the combination of money, power, betrayal, and public humiliation that seemed designed to capture the attention of a scandal-hungry public. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, from Daniel's associates, from people I barely knew who wanted to express support or gather gossip or simply be part of the drama that was consuming Boston's social scene. I refused all interviews. I wanted no part of the media circus, no platform for sharing my pain with strangers who saw my tragedy as entertainment. I had a different kind of work to do, the quiet, methodical work of reclaiming my life and ensuring that justice was fully served. The divorce proceedings began immediately. Claire connected me with an attorney named Margaret Chen, a woman with a reputation for being absolutely merciless in cases involving marital fraud. Margaret reviewed the evidence I had gathered and told me that I had one of the strongest cases she had ever seen. Not only could I secure a favorable divorce settlement, but I could potentially recover damages for the fraud Daniel had committed against me, including the forged signatures on documents that had exposed me to liability for his debts. Working with Margaret was like watching an artist at work. She anticipated every move Daniel's attorneys might make and prepared countermeasures in advance. She filed motions that froze his known assets, then used discovery to uncover assets he had hidden. She built a case that portrayed me as what I truly was, an innocent victim of a calculated con artist who had targeted me precisely because of my vulnerability and lack of family protection. Daniel, meanwhile, was struggling to mount any kind of defense. His bail was set at $5 million, a sum that his family could easily afford, but that revealed the seriousness with which the courts viewed his crimes. Victoria arranged for his release, but the conditions of his bail were restrictive. He could not leave the state. He could not contact any of the investors he had defrauded. He could not come near me or communicate with me in any way. That last condition was one I had specifically requested, and when it was granted, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I had not even realized I was carrying. For months, I had lived in the same house as my enemy, had slept beside him, had pretended to love him while secretly planning his destruction. Now I was finally free of his presence, free of his lies, free of the exhausting performance I had been delivering since that night I discovered the truth. I moved out of our brownstone and into a small apartment that Claire helped me find. It was nothing like the luxurious home I had shared with Daniel, but it was mine. It was honest. It was a place where I did not have to pretend to be anyone other than who I really was. In the weeks after the arrest, more information emerged about the scope of Daniel's crimes. Federal investigators discovered that he had defrauded investors out of more than $30 million over a period of 6 years. He had created fake companies, falsified property values, and promised returns on investments that never existed. He had used the money to fund his lavish lifestyle, to maintain his various mistresses, and to funnel cash to his mother's charitable foundation, which turned out to be nothing more than a vehicle for tax evasion and money laundering. Victoria was eventually charged as a co-conspirator, though her case proceeded separately from Daniel's. Her arrest was quieter, conducted at her home rather than in a public venue, but it made headlines nonetheless. The fall of the Mitchell family, once considered Boston aristocracy, was complete and devastating. I followed the news with mixed emotions. Part of me felt vindicated, satisfied that the people who had deceived me were finally facing justice, but another part of me grieved for the life I had lost, the future I had imagined, the family I had thought I was building. I had wanted so badly to belong somewhere, to have the stability and love that had been stolen from me when my parents died. Instead, I had married a criminal who saw me as nothing more than a useful prop. The divorce was finalized 6 months after Daniel's arrest. Under the terms of the settlement, I received a significant portion of the remaining marital assets, including equity in the brownstone and a share of Daniel's legitimate investments. More importantly, Margaret successfully argued that I should be indemnified against any liability for the debts Daniel had incurred in my name. The court agreed, and the fraudulent documents he had signed were voided. But the financial settlement was only part of my victory. The real satisfaction came from watching Daniel's trial unfold, from seeing the evidence I had helped gather presented in open court, from hearing the testimony of investors who had trusted him and been betrayed. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, built on documents and records and witness statements that painted a picture of systematic, deliberate fraud that had devastated dozens of families. Daniel's defense attorneys tried various strategies. They attempted to portray him as a businessman who had made mistakes rather than a criminal who had knowingly deceived his investors. They tried to shift blame onto his accountants, his partners, anyone other than Daniel himself. They even attempted to suggest that I had been involved in his schemes, a despicable tactic that Margaret quickly destroyed by presenting evidence of my own investigation and my cooperation with authorities. Throughout the trial, I attended every session. I sat in the gallery, watching Daniel squirm under cross-examination, watching his carefully constructed facade crumble as the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. He avoided looking at me whenever possible, but occasionally our eyes would meet, and in those moments, I let him see exactly what I felt. Not hatred, not anger, but something colder and more devastating. Indifference. He was no longer my husband, no longer my enemy. He was simply a criminal facing justice, a stranger I had once been foolish enough to trust. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Daniel was convicted of everything he had been charged with, and when the verdict was read, I felt something release inside me, a tension I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten it was there. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for being tough on white-collar crime, listened to statements from victims, from prosecutors, from Daniel's own attorneys pleading for leniency. Then she spoke, and her words were like a final decisive blow. "Mr. Mitchell, you have shown a pattern of deception and manipulation that is truly remarkable in its scope and its callousness. You stole from people who trusted you. You destroyed families who believed in you. You even betrayed your own wife, using her as a shield for your criminal activities while conducting affairs behind her back and forging her signature on fraudulent documents. Your actions represent the worst kind of white-collar crime, the abuse of trust for personal gain without any regard for the consequences to others." She sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison, 18 years during which I would rebuild my life, heal my wounds, and move forward into a future I could not yet imagine. 18 years during which Daniel would sit in a cell, stripped of the wealth and power and charm that had defined him, forced to confront the emptiness of the man he had always been. Victoria received a lesser sentence, 8 years, due to her age and her lesser role in the conspiracy. Her charitable foundation was dissolved, its assets seized and distributed to the victims of her son's fraud. The Mitchell family name, once synonymous with old Boston money and social prominence, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most respectable facades can hide the darkest secrets. In the months after Daniel's sentencing, I began the slow work of putting my life back together. I returned to my career, finding a new position at a smaller firm that valued my skills and offered me the flexibility I needed to continue healing. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, a kind and patient woman who helped me understand that what had happened to me was not my fault, that I had been the victim of a practiced manipulator who had exploited my best qualities for his own gain. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, people who had sensed something was wrong but had not known how to help. I reached out to distant relatives, the aunts and cousins I had lost touch with after my parents died, and began rebuilding the family connections I had sacrificed for Daniel's sake. I learned that I was not alone, that I had never been as isolated as I had believed, that there were people who cared about me and wanted to see me thrive. And I learned to trust myself again. I learned that the instincts I had suppressed during my marriage, the small warnings I had ignored because I wanted so badly to believe in the life Daniel had promised me, those instincts were valid and important. I learned to listen to them, to honor them, to never again silence my own inner voice in favor of someone else's comfortable lies. The story I have told you is not a simple tale of revenge. It is more complicated than that, more nuanced, more human. I did not destroy Daniel Mitchell out of petty spite or wounded pride. I destroyed him because he was hurting people, because he would have continued hurting people if he had been allowed to continue, because the system of deception he had built needed to be exposed and dismantled before it could cause even more damage. Part 2. Was there satisfaction in watching him fall? Yes, I will not pretend otherwise. There was deep, profound satisfaction in seeing justice served, in knowing that my actions had protected future victims from his predatory schemes. But there was also grief, loss, pain that does not simply vanish because the person who caused it has been punished. I am still healing. I suspect I will be healing for a long time, but I am also stronger than I have ever been. I am more certain of who I am and what I deserve. I am more capable of recognizing manipulation and deception before it can take root. I am more willing to trust my own judgment and to walk away from situations that feel wrong, even if I cannot articulate exactly why. The money I received from the divorce settlement has provided me with security I never imagined I would have. I have used some of it to establish a foundation in my parents' names, a charitable organization that provides support for young adults who have lost their parents and are struggling to navigate the world alone. It seems fitting that the wealth Daniel stole from others should now be used to help the kind of person I once was, young and scared and desperate for someone to believe in them. Claire remains my closest friend, the sister I never had by blood but found by fate. She stood beside me through everything, never wavering, never doubting, never letting me lose sight of who I was and what I deserved. I do not know how I would have survived without her, and I hope I never have to find out. Marcus the investigator still checks in occasionally, sharing coffee and conversation that has evolved from professional necessity to genuine friendship. He tells me he has never had a client quite like me, someone who approached the destruction of her own marriage with such methodical precision. I tell him I learned from an accountant's training that finding fraud is just a matter of following the numbers until they tell you the truth. As for Daniel, I rarely think of him anymore. He is a chapter of my life that has ended, a lesson I have learned, a mistake I will never make again. I do not visit him in prison. I do not read his letters, which arrived regularly at first before eventually stopping. I have heard through the legal grapevine that he blames me for everything, that he cannot accept responsibility for his own choices, that he remains as narcissistic and self-deceiving in his cell as he was in his corner office. None of this surprises me. People like Daniel rarely change. They simply find new audiences for their performances, new victims for their manipulations. But I have changed. I am not the same woman who married Daniel Mitchell, who believed his lies, who sacrificed her own identity for the promise of love and stability. I am someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the long, patient work of justice. I am someone who knows her own worth, who trusts her own instincts, who will never again let anyone make her feel small or stupid or undeserving of the truth. My husband turned into my enemy. That is the simple version of the story, the headline that captures attention without conveying meaning. But the truth is more complicated. My husband was always my enemy. He was my enemy from the moment we met, from the first flattering words he spoke, from the calculated campaign of seduction that ended with a ring on my finger and years of my life stolen for his benefit. I simply did not know it until that October evening when a careless email notification revealed the truth behind his beautiful facade. If you are listening to this story and recognizing something familiar, if you are seeing your own situation reflected in my words, I want you to know that you are not crazy. Trust your instincts, pay attention to the inconsistencies, document everything, reach out to people who can help, and understand that leaving, that fighting back, that refusing to be a victim, these are not acts of destruction. They are acts of survival. They are the necessary steps toward reclaiming a life that someone else has tried to steal. I survived my husband's betrayal. I more than survived. I emerged stronger, wiser, and more certain of my own value than I have ever been. The journey was painful. The process was exhausting. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to accept the comfortable lies rather than face the uncomfortable truth. But I kept going. I followed the numbers. I gathered the evidence. And in the end, justice was served. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my husband became my enemy and how I made sure he would never hurt anyone again. But I realize now that I have rushed toward the ending without giving you the full picture of everything that happened between Daniel's arrest and his final sentencing. There were moments in those months that tested me in ways I could never have anticipated. Revelations that came to light long after I thought I knew the full scope of his betrayals. Let me take you back, because the truth is even darker than what I have described, and you deserve to know all of it. 3 weeks after Daniel was arrested, I received a phone call from a woman named Patricia Hawkins. I did not recognize her name at first, but she explained that she was an investor in Daniel's company, someone who had trusted him with her entire retirement savings based on recommendations from mutual acquaintances. She had seen my name in the news coverage of his arrest and had somehow obtained my phone number through a friend of a friend. "I know this is presumptuous," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion, "but I need to speak with you. I need to understand how this happened. My husband passed away 2 years ago, and the money I gave to Daniel was supposed to be my security for the rest of my life. Now it is all gone, and I do not know what I am going to do." I agreed to meet with her. I am not sure why. Perhaps because I understood loss in a way that few people do. Perhaps because I felt some responsibility, however irrational, for the crimes committed by the man I had married. Perhaps simply because I could hear in her voice the same devastation I had felt, and I knew she needed someone to listen. Patricia was 73 years old, a retired school teacher from a suburb of Boston who had trusted Daniel with $300,000, her entire life savings. She had been introduced to him at a charity event, the same kind of event where I had met him, and she had been charmed by his easy manner and impressive credentials. He had promised her guaranteed returns of 12% annually, far above what she could get from traditional investments, and she had believed him because he seemed so trustworthy, so professional, so genuinely interested in helping her secure her financial future. "He called me every month," she told me, her hands shaking around her cup of tea. "He would give me updates on my investments, tell me how well they were performing, assure me that my money was safe. I had no idea it was all fabricated. I had no idea the returns he was showing me existed only on paper." Listening to Patricia's story, I realized something that had not fully registered before. Daniel's crimes were not abstract. They were not victimless financial maneuvers affecting faceless corporations. They had destroyed real people's lives, people like Patricia who had worked hard and saved diligently and trusted a man who saw them as nothing more than targets for exploitation. Over the next few months, I heard from dozens of other victims. Some reached out to me directly. Others I connected with through the prosecutor's victim assistance program. Each story was unique, but they all shared common elements: trust that had been systematically betrayed, financial security that had been stolen, dreams that had been shattered by a man who smiled while he destroyed lives. There was a young couple who had invested their wedding savings, hoping to build a nest egg for the family they wanted to start. There was a small business owner who had put his company's retirement fund into Daniel's hands and now faced the prospect of telling his employees their pensions were gone. There was a widow like Patricia who had lost her husband and then lost everything else to a predator who targeted the vulnerable with practiced precision. Each story hardened my resolve. Each victim's face reminded me why I had done what I did, why I had spent months gathering evidence and planning Daniel's downfall instead of simply divorcing him and walking away. If I had chosen the easier path, these people would still be losing money to his schemes. New victims would be joining the ranks of the destroyed. Daniel would still be free to charm and manipulate and steal, protected by his family's wealth and social connections. But there were also moments of doubt, moments when the weight of what I had done pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. One night, about 2 months after Daniel's arrest, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of documents and evidence, and I broke down completely. I sobbed until my chest ached, until my throat was raw, until there was nothing left inside me but emptiness and exhaustion. I was not crying for Daniel. I was crying for the woman I had been, the woman who had believed in love and trust and the possibility of a happy ending. I was crying for my parents, who had died without ever seeing me build the stable, secure life they had wanted for me. I was crying for all the years I had wasted on a man who saw me as nothing more than a useful prop, all the love I had poured into a relationship that existed only in my imagination. Claire found me like that, curled up on the floor of my living room, surrounded by papers and photographs and the wreckage of my former life. She did not ask questions. She simply sat down beside me, wrapped her arms around me, and held me until the worst of the crying had passed. Then she helped me stand up, made me drink a glass of water, and gently but firmly reminded me why I was doing this. "You are not just fighting for yourself," she said. "You are fighting for everyone he hurt. You are fighting to make sure he can never do this again. That matters, Sarah. That means something." She was right. In the morning, I got up and continued working. I continued cooperating with prosecutors. I continued preparing for the divorce. I continued building the case that would eventually send Daniel to prison for nearly 2 decades. The grief did not disappear, but it took its place alongside the determination, becoming fuel rather than obstacle. 4 months before Daniel's trial was scheduled to begin, I discovered something that shook me to my core. Marcus called me with news that he had been hesitant to share, information so disturbing that he wanted to tell me in person rather than over the phone. We met at a park near my apartment, a quiet space where we could talk without being overheard. Marcus looked older than usual, his face lined with a weariness that went beyond simple tiredness. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, the voice of someone delivering terrible news. "I found evidence that Daniel was planning something," he said, "before he was arrested. Something involving you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Marcus handed me a folder containing printed emails, bank records, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs. As I looked through the materials, the horror of what I was seeing slowly became clear. Daniel had been making plans for a future that did not include me. He had been researching ways to transfer assets out of my name without my knowledge. He had been corresponding with attorneys in other countries about divorce laws and asset protection strategies. And most disturbingly, he had been investigating my life insurance policy, asking questions about payout procedures and beneficiary requirements. I looked up at Marcus, my hands trembling. "Are you saying he was planning to—" "I cannot prove intent," Marcus said carefully. "What I can tell you is that he was gathering information that would be useful if something happened to you. Whether he was actually planning to act on that information, I do not know. But combined with everything else we have found, it paints a very dark picture." I sat in silence for a long moment, processing what I had just learned. My husband, the man I had shared a bed with for years, might have been planning to kill me. The idea was so monstrous, so far beyond anything I had imagined, that my brain struggled to accept it as reality. But as I thought about it more, certain memories began to take on new significance. The time Daniel had insisted I increase my life insurance coverage, claiming it was just prudent financial planning. The hiking trip he had suggested to a remote area of New Hampshire, which I had declined because of work commitments. The way he had seemed increasingly frustrated with me in the months before I discovered his affairs, as if I was an obstacle he needed to remove rather than a partner he valued. Had he been building up to something? Had my discovery of his infidelity actually saved my life by giving me a reason to investigate before he could act on whatever plans he was making? I will never know for certain. The evidence Marcus found was suggestive but not conclusive. When the prosecutors reviewed it, they declined to add any charges related to potential harm to me, citing insufficient evidence of specific criminal intent. But they did use the information to strengthen their case about Daniel's overall character, painting a picture of a man capable of anything in pursuit of his own interests. The knowledge that Daniel might have been planning to hurt me changed something fundamental in my understanding of what I had escaped. I had thought of myself as a victim of fraud and infidelity, betrayals that were devastating but survivable. Now I understood that I might have been in genuine physical danger, that the man sleeping beside me might have been contemplating my death while I dreamed of our future together. It took months of therapy to process this revelation. My therapist helped me understand that the uncertainty was almost worse than knowing for sure, that the human mind struggles to accept ambiguity about such fundamental threats. She helped me develop strategies for managing the anxiety and hypervigilance that emerged as I tried to make sense of what Daniel might have been capable of. But she also helped me recognize something important. I had survived. Whatever Daniel was or was not planning, I had acted in time to protect myself. My instincts, once I finally listened to them, had guided me toward safety. The months of investigation, the careful planning, the patience and precision with which I had built my case, these were not just acts of revenge. They were acts of self-preservation. The trial itself lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with other victims and supporters, watching as the prosecution methodically demolished Daniel's defenses. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was damning. Even his own former employees turned against him, describing a culture of deception and intimidation that he had cultivated from the very beginning. Daniel took the stand in his own defense, against the advice of his attorneys. He tried to charm the jury the way he had charmed investors and women and everyone else who had ever trusted him. He presented himself as a businessman who had made mistakes, someone who had been in over his head but had never intended to hurt anyone. He spoke of his love for his family, his commitment to his company, his genuine belief that the investments would eventually pay off. When the prosecutor cross-examined him, his facade crumbled. She confronted him with email after email in which he had knowingly lied to investors, document after document proving he had fabricated returns and hidden losses. She asked him about the millions of dollars that had gone to his personal accounts, the luxury goods and mistresses and hidden apartments that his victims' money had funded. She asked him about the forged documents bearing my signature, the life insurance research, the evidence that suggested I was more valuable to him dead than alive. Daniel had no answers. He stammered and deflected and contradicted himself until even the most sympathetic juror could see him for what he truly was. Not a businessman who had made mistakes, but a predator who had deliberately targeted vulnerable people for his own enrichment. When the guilty verdicts were read, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly. Vindication. But also sadness for the years I had lost, the dreams I had surrendered, the person I had been before Daniel Mitchell taught me that love could be the most dangerous illusion of all. The sentencing hearing was the last time I saw Daniel in person. He stood before the judge in his orange prison uniform, his expensive suits and tailored shirts replaced by the uniform of the convicted. His mother sat behind him, her face a mask of defiant anger that could not quite hide her devastation. Rebecca was nowhere to be seen, having long since been discarded once her usefulness as a witness was exhausted. The victims spoke first. One by one, they approached the podium and described how Daniel's crimes had affected their lives. Patricia told the court about losing her retirement savings and being forced to move in with her daughter because she could no longer afford to live independently. The young couple described their shattered dreams, the wedding they had to cancel, the family they could no longer afford to start. The small business owner spoke of his employees' betrayal, good people who had trusted him and now faced an uncertain future because he had trusted the wrong person. When my turn came, I walked to the podium with steady steps and clear eyes. I had prepared remarks, written and rewritten over many sleepless nights. But when I looked at Daniel's face, I set aside my notes and spoke from the heart. "I believed in you," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "I gave you my trust, my love, my faith in the possibility of a shared future. You took all of that and used it to cover your crimes, to shield yourself from suspicion, to continue hurting people while hiding behind the appearance of a respectable marriage." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I do not hate you. I am not sure I even blame you anymore. People like you are what they are. You cannot help being empty inside any more than a shark can help being a predator. But I want you to know something. I survived. The people in this room survived. And we will continue to survive long after you are forgotten." Daniel looked away from me, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. I realized that this would be my last memory of him. A diminished figure in prison clothes, stripped of everything that had made him seem powerful and attractive, facing the consequences he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The judge's sentence of 18 years felt like justice, though I knew it would never fully compensate for what had been lost. Money can be recovered, at least partially. Trust, once shattered, is much harder to rebuild. The victims of Daniel Mitchell's crimes would carry the scars of his betrayal for the rest of their lives, just as I would carry mine. In the years since Daniel's conviction, I have slowly rebuilt my life. I moved to a different neighborhood, started fresh with new routines and new connections. I developed friendships with some of the other victims, people who understood what I had been through because they had experienced versions of it themselves. We support each other, celebrate each other's recoveries, remind each other that we are more than what was done to us. My foundation, the one I established in my parents' names, has grown beyond anything I initially imagined. We now provide scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship to dozens of young adults who have lost their parents and are struggling to navigate the world alone. Every time I meet one of our scholarship recipients, every time I see them building the stable future they deserve, I feel my parents' presence in a way I cannot fully explain. I have not dated anyone seriously since Daniel. The therapist says this is normal, that rebuilding trust takes time, that there is no rush to find a new relationship before I am ready. Part of me wonders if I will ever be ready, if the damage Daniel did is too deep to fully heal. But another part of me remains hopeful, believes that somewhere in my future there is someone worthy of the trust I have to give. Claire got married last spring to a wonderful man who treats her exactly as she deserves to be treated. I was her maid of honor, standing beside her as she made promises to someone who would actually keep them. During the ceremony, I thought about my own wedding, about the lies I had unknowingly spoken, about the future I had imagined and the reality I had received instead. But the tears I cried were tears of joy for Claire, not grief for myself. I have moved beyond grief. I have arrived at something like acceptance. Marcus retired from the investigation business shortly after Daniel's conviction. He told me the case had taken more out of him than he expected, that seeing the depth of human cruelty never got easier no matter how many times he witnessed it. We still have lunch occasionally, two people bound together by the strange intimacy of the work we did together. He asks about the foundation. I ask about his grandchildren. We do not talk about Daniel. Victoria Mitchell died in prison 2 years after her conviction, a heart attack that took her quickly and without warning. I felt nothing when I heard the news. She had been complicit in her son's crimes, had benefited from other people's suffering, had looked down on me from the moment we met because I was not born into the kind of family she valued. Her death closed a chapter, but did not bring me any particular satisfaction. Daniel remains in federal prison. He will be eligible for parole in 12 years, though his behavior as an inmate has apparently not been exemplary. I try not to think about his eventual release. By the time he gets out, if he gets out, I will be a completely different person, living a completely different life. He will be a stranger, a footnote in my history, someone I used to know before I became who I was always meant to be. Sometimes late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about the woman I was before I married Daniel Mitchell. I think about her optimism, her trust, her desperate hope that love could fill the emptiness left by her parents' deaths. I feel both tenderness and exasperation toward that younger version of myself, understanding her choices while wishing she had been wiser, more cautious, less willing to believe beautiful lies. But I also know that becoming her again is neither possible nor desirable. The woman I am now, the woman forged in betrayal and tempered by justice, she is stronger than that younger version ever was. She knows her own worth. She trusts her own instincts. She has built a life that belongs entirely to her, uncontaminated by anyone else's deceptions. My husband turned into my enemy. That was the title of this story, the hook that drew you in, the simple summary of a complicated journey. but I hope you understand now that the truth is more nuanced than any title can convey. Daniel Mitchell was never truly my husband. He was a performance, a character created to deceive and exploit. The man I married existed only in my imagination, built from the lies he told me and the dreams I desperately wanted to believe. When I discovered the truth, that imaginary husband died, and in his place stood the stranger who had been hiding behind the mask all along. Becoming his enemy was not a choice I made out of hatred or vengeance. It was a recognition of reality, an acceptance that the relationship I thought I had was fundamentally false. Enemies are what we become when trust is impossible and coexistence is untenable. Daniel made us enemies through his actions. I simply acknowledged what he had already created. The revenge I took was not petty or cruel. It was measured, proportional, and ultimately just. I gathered evidence. I cooperated with authorities. I ensured that the people he had hurt would have their day in court and that he would face real consequences for his crimes. If that is revenge, then it is the kind of revenge that makes the world a better place. Not for me alone, but for everyone who might have become his victim if he had been allowed to continue. In the end, justice was served. Karma caught up with the man who thought himself too clever to be caught. The truth was revealed, and the lies that had propped up his life came crashing down around him. And I survived. I more than survived. I found my strength, built my purpose, and created a life that would have made my parents proud. The little girl who lost everything became the woman who took back what was hers. The trusting wife who believed beautiful lies became the clear-eyed survivor who demanded the truth. This is my story. It is a story of betrayal and its consequences. It is a story of darkness and the light that eventually emerged from it. It is a story of one woman's journey from victim to victor, from blindness to clarity, from the ashes of a destroyed marriage to the foundations of a meaningful life. If there is a lesson in what I have told you, it is this: trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, investigate. When lies are revealed, act. When someone betrays you, remember that their actions define them, not you. You are not diminished by someone else's treachery. You are not made less by being deceived. The shame belongs to the deceiver, never to the deceived. And if you find yourself in a situation like mine, surrounded by lies you are only beginning to uncover, know that you have options. Know that there are people who will help you. Know that the truth, however painful it may be, is always preferable to a comfortable fiction. Know that you are stronger than you believe, braver than you feel, and more deserving of honesty and respect than anyone who would lie to you. My husband turned into my enemy, but in the end, I became something far more important. I became myself, fully, completely, and without apology. That is the real revenge, the real justice, the real ending to this story. I am Sarah, I survived, and I am finally, truly free. You are a professional storyteller and YouTube scriptwriter for a dramatic, revenge-based betrayal storytelling channel where close relationships turn into enemies. Channel, niche context, language, English audience, global, mainly US, UK. Core theme, close relationships, friends, lovers, spouses, siblings, parents, business partners, classmates, roommates, turning toxic and becoming enemies through betrayal, lies, jealousy, manipulation, or financial betrayal. Style, first-person emotional confession suitable for AI voiceover on YouTube. I will provide one title or story topic. Before writing the story, first outline complete character details for the main characters, including name, age, gender, personality, in 3 words. Background, in 3 words. Choose the narrator's gender, male or female, automatically based on which perspective best fits the story's emotional depth and realism. After outlining the character details, write a highly engaging, realistic, long-form revenge story told entirely in the first-person perspective of the chosen narrator, set in the UK or the USA. The betrayer must be someone very close, and the story should feel like a real-life personal confession. Length and style: 1.5 to 2 hours of narration, approximately 15,000, 25,000 words. Simple, spoken English, natural and emotional. One continuous narrative with no headings, parts, bullets, or explanations. Tone and themes: emotional, suspenseful, dramatic, and realistic, modern real-world setting. Themes of betrayal, broken trust, manipulation, emotional or financial damage, and calculated revenge. Story structure and engagement: start with a powerful, emotional hook. Introduce betrayal early, make revenge the central theme. Add a new twist, secret, or revelation every 2 to 3 minutes. Show the relationship transforming from trust, suspicion, enemy build. Revenge slowly, intelligently, and mostly legally. Show guilt, doubt, fear, and emotional conflict. Gradually reveal lies, hidden motives, and truth. Content rules: YouTube friendly. No graphic violence, sexual content, or hate monetization. Safe language. Only use words like betrayed, exposed, truth revealed, consequences, karma, justice. Do not mention being an AI ending. Truth is fully exposed. Betrayer faces real consequences: social, legal, financial, emotional, or reputational. Ending feels satisfying and gives closure or strength to the narrator. Output format: first show character details, then output only the full story in 2 parts and must in paragraph form, no titles, no summaries, no commentary. When I send: title, topic, "My husband turned into my enemy." You will respond with the complete story following all rules above.